Who's talking first?
You're going first. Hi. I was like, gotta mute myself. I am so excited. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Pamela and I have gotten to know each other over the last few years by working together on Queer Arts Mentor. So I'm so excited because this is my girl. This is my queen.
What?
I love her.
What?
She brings me so much joy. So I'm really excited because I feel like y'all are going to just kind of get to see us vibe and kiki the way we do anyway. But to get us started, I asked Pamela if she would read a bit, and then we'll get into our conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Pamela Sneed.
Hey, everybody. I can't answer all the messages in the chat, but thank you for writing me and thank you for being here. And thank you, McNally Jackson. Thank you, Stacey Lewis. Thank you, Saeed. I'm so thrilled. I'm gonna switch it up. And I haven't, since the book has been published, I actually haven't read anything from Funeral Diva. And from that particular piece, which is the title. And I'm gonna read a little bit from that. So I'll start there. And I sort of start in the middle. I'm not sure where it belongs, but I must insert. There were times when I, the funeral diva, was not always noble. I was traveling while my dear friend, the visual artist Dawn Reed, was dying, and I ran away. We worked together at the Hedrick Martin Institute for Gay and Lesbian Youth. He was an art therapist, and at 23 years old, I ran the after-school program. I met him on a panel first at Harlem Hospital. He was part of the group that existed in the 80s called Black and White Men Together. At that panel, Don carried on his back the baby son he'd adopted with his white partner. This is long before gay people adopting children was common. His son's name was Max, and he was a tiny brown baby Don adored. Later, working at the Institute, Don and I would have many adventures and escapades with baby Max in tow. There was a time, a year or two after Max started walking, he wanted to be a peacock for Halloween. Don, being a gay man, a visual artist, and a sudden costume designer, searched day and night for real feathers. He spent all night sewing together Max's costume. There was also a time we took baby Max to church, and because Don raised him to be free, Max wandered down the aisle at 3 years old, stood next to the preacher, and did an interpretive dance interpretation of the preacher's words. The preacher seemed annoyed, but Dawn, a proud parent, smiled the whole time. I remember our offices at the Institute, located on the West Side Highway across from the Hudson River in infamous Piers. There was lots of sunlight. We were in formation. We were making ourselves. While others were dying around us, Dawn was in denial about HIV, AIDS. We never talked about it. Even when he got the telltale pneumonia, the rapid weight loss, and the terrible fear, we never said AIDS. By then, I had left the agency. I was traveling as an actor and leaving the next day when I heard Don was in the hospital. I understood he asked for me. I heard his voice in my head asking a friend, "How's Pam?" But my feet were leaden. I couldn't go. I didn't want my last image to be of a man shrunken down to a skeleton. Like the recent survivors of Hurricane Katrina and Maria in Puerto Rico, I was grief-stricken and waterlogged. Maybe this is like scenes from the Holocaust or World War II, admissions you won't find in any history book, but like in concentration camps, when stripped to bare essentials, like in a novel popular during the 1970s, when survivors of a plane crash devoured human flesh, or Margaret Garner, the slave who ran away and murdered her own child rather than to see it become a slave. In Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved, she is haunted by the child's ghost. Like in Chimamanda Adichie's novel, Half of a Yellow Sun, about the Nigerian Biafran War, a beloved boy character whom we believed is so corrupted and dehumanized by war, he participates in a gang rape. There's a story I heard in South Africa after the end of apartheid. A boy and his friend rape a girl on the road. They kill her. The boy eventually turns her over and discovers the girl he raped and killed was actually his own sister. A teacher hears this story and screams out to her classroom appalled, asking, after all Black people have fought and died for. Tell me, is this the new South Africa? Like that South African boy, Margaret Garner, the subjects of Viktor Frankl's essays about the Holocaust and others, some of us in the AIDS crisis did terrible things to survive. Never made it down aisles of the hospital wards of Bellevue and St. Vincent's, couldn't bear shit-stained walls and terrible, wretched smells of death. Some of us couldn't bear the hatred and scornful eyes as we passed the nurses' station, saw doctors and family members who blamed us. Some of us were so grief-soaked and waterlogged we couldn't take one more step, having seen and experienced things in our young lifetimes that no human being or citizen should. During Hurricane Katrina, I was in Ghana. On television, I saw a tidal wave sweep downstairs and trap a young Black girl. Firefighters yelled through a basement window, "Hold on, baby girl, just hold on, we're coming." But despite hers and their desperate efforts, she drowned. Some of us were noble. We tried, but we just couldn't carry anymore, and we were forced to let go. Watch bodies devoured, the very breath and essence stolen, limbs, life support cut off. Some of us went MIA, AWOL. Were forced into black market drugs and operations like women in the 60s using cord, wire hangers, and glass to abort in back alleys. Some like Sammy, lover of Michael Brody, father of the Paradise Garage, a beautiful Latino boy with pure soul, was ravaged by AIDS, shot himself in the head at point blank range, couldn't stand what the virus did to him. The shame he felt, like something out of Kafka's Metamorphosis, when a human being is transformed into a bug. We became pariahs, the despised, choosing to wear in defiance badges. Gays in the Holocaust wore pink triangles, like something out of Poe's Telltale Heart. Like in the Diary of Anne Frank, we hid beneath floorboards, transforming into monsters or messiahs because, as Audre Lorde declared in her battle with cancer, once having come face to face with death, who might ever have power over us again? Some of us who were witnesses had blinders and bandages ripped off, developed an X-ray vision. Some of us, like survivors of the Japanese internment camps and World War II, having lost everything, developed new appreciation for life. For some of us, snowfall, rain, water, flowers, a book, apple, paintbrushes, papers, pens took on new meaning. Some of us, when we were touched or someone actually was kind, we cried. The only words I have to describe this time were the words written by poet Michael LaSalle, "How to Watch Your Brother Die," and Essex Hempel's "When My Brother Fell." The only thing that kept us all going were words of Audrey, Essex, Pat Parker, and Joe Beam. The only thing that freed me from the guilt of not seeing Dawn in the hospital was a story I read years later by Bell Hooks when she talked about not going to see a grandmother who was dying because she said I was the person who loved her most. When Dawn died, I was on a hilltop outside of Paris. Like a cord cut, I felt the exact moment breath left his body. When I returned home from Paris, I saw Max, who was about 4 years old. We went to a museum together. The next day I called, and Dawn's surviving lover, Steve, reported Max had awakened the day after we went to the museum and said aloud, after I had just begun to believe my friend Dawn was dead and gone forever, "Pamela laughs like daddy." Dawn Reed, Roy Buchanan, Craig Harris, David Frechette, Essex Hempel are just a few. There are countless others. So many wakes and funerals I attended, paying tribute to strangers, as if each were a family member of my own or a close friend. But the basis of this story could never be for thousands, hundreds of thousands who died, about massive grief remaining unprocessed, blows endured to every industry, fashion, literature, business, performance. It's not about the mysteries, invisible hands, minds, legs behind things I still think, wear, do. It's not about the martyrs who gave and lost lives so that we can now enjoy freedoms of marriage and protection under the law. It's not about men and women I will never forget, faces publicly streaked with tears, empty caskets carried openly through the streets in protests. It's not about those like Alan Williams who worked with me at the Gay and Lesbian Institute, a volunteer who would say every time I saw him, "You're so beautiful." He loved to hear the story of how I, as a little girl, a little Black girl, would go to the hairdresser as a child and ask the hairdresser to make my hair whirl and twirl like the figure skater Dorothy Hamill. Write that story, he'd say. This story is not about Tim Boyd, the sign language interpreter whom I'd often performed with, who died from AIDS, and his mother who still grieves. It's not about my friend, Don Reed, the beautiful collages he made, and the son, lover, and friends he left behind. It's not about Jody from the South, the first white boy whom I ever heard say y'all, and all those gay boys I met and worked with at a restaurant in Boston who disappeared like thousands of bits of paper. Wind just simply took, gone, disappeared like those dissidents of Castro's Cuba, like the friends and supporters of Allende. This story is not about them. It's not about heroic women, Audre Lorde, June Jordan, Pat Parker, my grandmother, and the cancer they fought. It's not about conspiracies, neglect, nor costumes I wore. It's not about today where people can actually live with HIV and AIDS. It's not about those miracle drugs and cocktails, though I do wish could have gotten here just one day, a moment or second sooner and saved just one more. In the words of Schindler, who saved Jews from the Gestapo and bought their freedom, even after he spent his lifetime fortune, he wants to save more. And at the end of the film, he's broken and he cries out as if he's bargaining with God, "One more, please, God, just one more." In my own words, after every semester teaching students, seeing so many grow and change, but wishing my hands could reach and were big enough and I could save just one more. Like Harriet Tubman after every mission, having rescued over 300 slaves, but said if they only knew that they were slaves, I could have saved so many more. No, this story is not about them, but like a song is sung with all of my soul, all my blood, and is dedicated to one person, one memorial, one funeral, one tribute where I did not speak.
Whew. Thank you so much for writing that, first of all, for offering that to all of us, but also for reading that tonight. Thank you, Pamela. It was one of the many times in the book where I had to like put the book against my chest for a second and just absorb it. And it's also helpful because it speaks to a question I wanted to get started with, which was, you know, that section you kind of capture a moment where you reject the role that, you know, encapsulates the book's title, right? Like you decide, like, I can't be the funeral diva. I cannot actually in this moment be the person who shows up and is at Don Reed's bedside or is speaking at the funeral and is, you know, kind of bringing this chosen family together. That said, I wanted to ask you, you know, how did you come into your awareness of this role? I mean, you know that, you know, in particular, women, whether it's, you know, artists or caregivers, played such an important role during the early years of the plague. How did you come into your awareness of like, this is a function that I'm performing for my people?
I don't think I was that like aware of it. Like I know that at Craig Harris's funeral, and Craig was like such a diva. And there's something that I want to write about him. He worked at GMHC and he was like outrageous and he like, you know, smoked long Virginia Slim, you know, cigarettes, and he was like working in Harlem like before people would really say HIV and AIDS, and he was like confronting people. He's like, "Honey, I've got these bricks in my bag and I'm not afraid to throw them." So he was like very like confrontational. And and what was it? Yeah, and there's something. He stormed one of like the World Health Organizations. He stormed the stage, and he said that he said, "I will be heard."
Mm.
You know, and I really want to write that because I feel like, you know, the histories of like Black lesbians and gays, you know, LGBTQI, people of color, you know, fighting back hasn't really been documented.
Mm-hmm.
And I like, I think like that's why I write a lot about Asado. That's why I write a lot about, you know, and I want to write that story about, you know, Craig, you know, storming, and it was written in one article, you know, where he like stormed across the stage and he said, he took over the microphone, he's like, "I will be heard," you know. So I want to remember those people. But so when I went to Craig's funeral, I wore this like really huge orange hat. Like it was
Mm.
like, it was orange, it was red, it was like something you would see like from a 50s, you know, 50s diva or something. I
Like
don't
way
know.
out.
You know, like with a veil or
Oh,
something.
okay. Like Hello
And I
Dolly.
mean, it was outrageous, you know. And I was like, but Craig could like really appreciate this, you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
and so I think after that, like I think I had an awareness of like wanting to do things that would tribute them,
Mm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it, maybe the term started to arise, you know, afterwards. Is like, you know, funeral diva. It's like we had been through so many. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying? And definitely I was like a beloved, you know, sister, you know, of like all of other countries. And so I don't know, you know, it's just kind of like, I don't think the name came until later,
Mm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um yeah, but it was just like we all fell into these roles, you know. It was just sort of like, you know, and again I say like, you know, in the 40s, like, you know, during World War II, you know, and men went abroad and then women had to take on untraditional roles, right? So it was just kind of like, so, you know, all of, you know, my brothers were dying, and so each of us had to pick up some role that we weren't like accustomed to. I mean, and we were also all like, we were all kids and we had to like kind of grow up overnight, you know what I mean?
Right.
and
Yeah.
um and that's why I think like the poetry of that time was so incredible, because it's just kind of like, well, you know, if you know you've got like, you know, a month, 3 weeks or something like that, you're not really going to waste a lot of time. You're going to say what you need to say, you know, you're going to tell the truth. And so I think that urgency and just the breadth of what we were going through,
Mm-hmm.
you know, forced us to kind of grow up like, really, it was accelerated, you know. Like people talk about like, you know, in the hood and like, you know, guys getting shot and stuff like that and girls getting raped, and it's like, well, you know, in the queer community it was like this, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you note that you were kids because Twizzlers, another poem that stands out to me. At one point you say, size, color, class. I was never allowed to be little. By little I mean innocent. By little I mean allowed to play, make mistakes. And you unpack that, right? We see that you know, in your literal childhood, but also, yeah, I was struck. Like as I was thinking, I was like doing the math, and I was like, oh my gosh, like Pamela was so young when, you know, as you know, like all of your brothers were dying, all of your chosen family, your mentors, your former classmates, you know, your fellow art makers,
And
and so
yeah,
yeah,
and then,
yeah.
well, and then also we were just all coming out too. You
Mm,
know what I mean? So we're
wow.
just all like coming into like acceptance of like who we are. You know
Mm-hmm,
what I mean? And
mm-hmm,
like, and then, you know, and then struck by this like, you know, devastating plague. You know what I
mm-hmm.
mean? So it's just
Right.
like 1 minute you know, you articulate your desire, and the next
Mm-hmm,
minute you may be dead. You know what I mean? It
mm-hmm.
was just like, it
That's a
was so
lot.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
compounded with a lot. And so we didn't get to be children, you know, that was really taken away. You know, like I always think about like the first lines of Allen Ginsberg's Howl, you
Mm,
know, and I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed, you
mm-hmm.
know, and that's like, that's my story, you know,
Yeah.
as well. you know.
Ooh, well, it's interesting because early in, and I think of I've seen a few people note this, that like it feels like it's helpful to think of the pandemic in terms of like television seasons, because so much has happened, and it feels like we're in like season 4 of the pandemic. But way back during season 1, like maybe back in March, the first few weeks of lockdown and everything, I remember really bristling at comparisons and analogies that were being drawn between the pandemic, which again then it was at least here, in very early stages, a very different situation than we see even now, to the early years of the AIDS plague. I felt that was like a little ham-fisted, maybe even disrespectful. And of course, I say that I was not alive, for those early years. I didn't experience them, but I just felt, I was like, I don't know. Lately, I've kind of maybe started to come back around, maybe based on like, the way the government has been just so wildly irresponsible. But I wanted to ask you, as someone who has lived through, now 2 very important historical moments, and you write about them in the book, the pandemic as well. How do you feel about the relationship between HIV, AIDS, and COVID-19?
Well, the relationship for me is really about like knowledge. Like I'm not, again, I say in a tale of like 2 pandemics, it's just like, people are going, oh my God, shocking inequities in the healthcare system. You're like, hello, where have you been? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I've been here before. I've had my eyes open about like how America functions. I mean, even like, what happened, like segregation, and like, what was it? Chris Rock just told some story about how his mother or somebody had to go to the vet to actually get their teeth taken out, like because they couldn't go to a dentist.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? So I mean, like we know about like shocking inequities in the healthcare system. So I really feel like having lived through that, lived through AIDS and HIV, has prepared me for COVID-19 in certain ways. Like I'm not surprised, you know what I mean? And then, again, who's disproportionately affected,
right.
People of color, poor people. But I don't like really ascribe to, it being the same, because I do think that, like the things that happen, people being put out in like trash bags, and families just don't, like the level of like homophobia, and how that played such a huge role, in the treatment or lack of treatment and stuff like that. No one is saying, COVID is God's curse on, on heterosexuals or something, you know what I mean? So that's it's a whole different ball game. But there are things that I can see in terms of how the medical system has responded, how the fact that, different, stress or shame, and, they're definitely like parallels and stuff like that. But I actually wrote a piece too about being mad sometimes, because I thought like the parallels were being made too easily, and it's like, honey, you have no idea.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's disturbing that even without, the normed shame and homophobia and every, our government's response has still been so incredibly lackluster, and Black people, Black women in particular, have been, and Latina women, in some ways like uniquely burdened, all over again.
Well, it's a genocide.
Yeah.
It's a genocide.
Woo!
Trump is like, they're like, that administration. They're like laughing and like, they just, and he said, yeah, we're gonna lose a few. You know what I mean? Right. And it's like, So it is. I mean, it's like it's a genocide, advertently, inadvertently. I don't know. You know what I mean? But it's also like it has to do with class. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, if you have the means to kind of like, protect yourself or fly to a private island or, go to a bunker, you know what I'm saying? Or even to get the kind of medicine that you need to survive it. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, there's class and race and all kinds of things at play. And then, there's another story that I have, a poem in the book where I talk about, a friend of mine, from the club days, dying. And, he's a big Black guy and queer. And he had HIV AIDS and like they sent him home. He had COVID as well. They sent him home and he like, died like a couple of days later. They didn't think about treating him. And then I was like, well, because he's like a big Black guy, they just couldn't imagine, that he needed help. I mean, again, we're all projecting our stories into it. You know what I mean? Maybe that wasn't the story, but that's what I saw. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I would argue statistics usually, or back you up on that point.
Right.
One of the gems in the book I found was your relationship to Toni Morrison and Toni Morrison's work. I mean, you mentioned Margaret Garner, who's the inspiration for Beloved in the section of the book you read tonight. The book also opens with like a charmed young Pamela Sneed in the city moment, right at the beginning. And I held my cheeks. I was so happy. And so I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that moment. It's so lovely. And then also, your relationship to her work, because, I love that there are cultural references, kind of throughout. You're mentioning Kafka, for example, but Toni Morrison comes up quite a bit throughout Funeral Diva. So can you talk about the great Tomo?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I just love her. Like I mean, I guess she gave me a voice, right? And I mean, I think Beloved is like one of the greatest, novels like of all time. And it's not really, I don't think it's ever been recognized for like what it actually does. I mean, she's talking about like a woman who's haunted by her child that she killed, to prevent it from being a slave, right? But it's about like our society being haunted, by slavery, by the ghosts of slavery that have never been reckoned with, Right. And so, I mean, it's really powerful and it's really like, ahead of its time. And I don't know, like I've read Beloved like 5 times, maybe more, maybe 8. And at first I couldn't get it, I couldn't really unlock it, but it was really after that time that I was doing drugs. I think I was talked about in the book, and I mean, I was really out there, I was really out there. And I mean, I really didn't know if I was going to make it, and I went home to my parents' house and I had Beloved. And I say in a poem, I don't know if I say it in the book, but I was reading to heal, And so, and then, and there was a part about, what is it, Amy? Is it the girl?
Amy is the white girl.
Right, right. That she finds right in the woods.
Yeah.
And then she like, no, the girl finds her.
The girl finds her. Yeah.
It is massaging her frostbitten limbs.
Yes.
And she says, anything dead coming back to life hurts.
Yep. Yeah. I think you do mention that in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Not the whole thing, but I mean,
but
like the
line,
concept of reading to heal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because a lot of times we don't talk about that, right? But like, that was what kind of like unlocked me. And I got to that point where they said anything dead coming back to life hurts. And I started crying because I remember I looked at all my journals and they say, oh, I was numb. I'm numb. So I just couldn't, feel anything. And then like at that point in the book, I started to feel.
Oof. I know that feeling. I absolutely know that it's like a painful, not even rebirth, but coming back into oneself. It's
so it really saved me, and so I don't know, it's really funny like with literature. So I mean, she really unlocked an experience for me. She gave me language. You know, she's brilliant. Like I think about, like, you know, what is it, a mercy, you know, and like, I mean, that's like pure poetry, you know what I'm saying? It's like that's a poem. You know what I mean?
A Mercy is a very lyric novel. I need to reread it, but I remember.
And then at the end, you know, and she kind of twisted and she says it was a mercy. I was like, oh my God, what? You know what I mean?
Love it. I love it.
So
Well,
I hear, I mean, I hear all this stuff in my head. Like it's like, so have you read Yakiasi's Homegoing?
I haven't.
Yeah, see, like, and I really, I mean, you know, between us and the audience, I really didn't like it, like initially, you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And you know, I just had some issues. Like I thought it was brilliant in terms of, like, again, you know, I mentioned Cape Coast Castle, the slave fort, you know, a lot. And that was really transformative for me, you know, in my work. And then finally, here we have a writer who situates historical fiction at Cape Coast Castle. So it's like, yes, bring it on. Way overdue, right? And but then it was like, oh, okay, there's a soap opera at, you know, Cape Coast Castle. And it's like, I wasn't that happy about that. You know what I mean? There were just some things that were like, just seemed rather preposterous, right? And but like once I settled into it, you know, and then those generations and generations of, you know, slaves and like passing one stone to another, you know, to another. And then finally at the end, the girl, the descendant who's wearing the stone, she's outside of Cape Coast Castle and she takes it off and she flings it over to her lover and she says, here, you take it. And it's like her taking off this great weight, you know? That stone, I mean, on one hand it's like legacy, it's, you know, heritage, but then on the other hand it's also a weight, you know, and that burden. Finally outside of Cape Coast Castle, she, you know, she tosses it, right? And I'm just like, okay, that's it, you know. It's like, so now I'm like, so I hear all this stuff, all like when I read things that I really like, it just I don't know, it gets inside of me. So I kind of do stuff like movie-oki or like literature-oki. You know, I get all the lines. I have the lines in my head. You know what I mean? The lines and somebody, you know, the scene, the characters.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, because I mean, you know, it's like they're, you know, a powerful line, and certainly as poets we feel this way, but a powerful line or a powerful sentence in a novel, you know, it's like a tool. It's like, you know, anything coming back from the dead, you know, it hurts. It's like, oh my gosh, thank you. This is a tool that I'm going to use to build, you know, and construct for the rest of my life. To that point, you know, I think you mentioned it to me. Well, I remember you telling me a while back that you were like, I have been working on Funeral Diva for a long time. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then when I read Parul's wonderful review in the New York Times, praiseworthy review of Funeral Diva, she knows she worked on this book for 15 years. And I was like, oh shit, oh, okay.
Right.
And so I wanted to, you know, and it's lovely seeing poems like Sidewalk Rage, which I've gotten to see you perform, you know, included in the book. I wanted to ask you, you know, as someone who took 5 years, you know, to write my memoir, and I was like, that was an odyssey. And I feel like by the time I finished the book, I was a different person. I grew up, you know, in a way in the experience of writing it. I wanted to ask you about the experience of working on Funeral Diva over the course of 15 years. What changed? You know, what did it teach you?
Well, I mean, there were a couple of stories. They started after like 9/11, right? And so, like, definitely, what was it? Funeral Diva, Isla, and the first one, History, like, all started around that time. And interestingly enough, I just, you know, I penned them. I mean, they were very, very different works at that particular point, right? But so I penned them, and then interestingly enough, I was working on an epic called America Ain't Ready. And Yeah, and I really wanted it to be like an updated Howl, you know, like and I wanted it to be about like the role of artists in society.
Mhm.
And like now people are starting to like say it, you know, talk about like, you know, the work of artists and valuing art and all this other stuff. And I start with a day without art, and I ask
Mhm.
actually everyone to imagine the world where you don't have words, you don't have movies, you have none of the things that artists like offer you, you know. And like yeah, it's like 100 and something page epic, and like
Wow.
it's funny, it's serious, it's all this.
Mhm.
But I think people really weren't ready, you know what I mean? And you know what I'm saying? I mean, like
Uh-huh.
now, you know, you have like Claudia Rankine, like, you know, did the epics, I guess, and
Mhm.
you know, or the prose poem and stuff like that. And then people
Mhm.
like, ooh, ooh, you
Right.
know, it's like we've been doing this forever,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But people get ready for the form. And so for some reason, I put like a couple of these pieces
Mhm.
in front of America Ain't Ready. And I gave them to Amy when she was at the Feminist Press.
Mhm.
And she said, well, you know, I don't think America Ain't Ready is like right for us. But those pieces that you know you put in the front, those are really interesting. Would you
Mhm.
work on those? And I was like, what? And I
Mhm.
really had never even thought about them.
Mm.
I didn't, I mean, I saw them as an introduction to America Ain't Ready.
Okay.
So the fact that, like, I think Amy asking me about them like 10
Mhm.
years ago,
Okay.
um, I think that, like, was the first time that I thought, oh,
Mm.
autobiographical stories.
Mhm.
Oh, you know what I mean? And then, like, from there, like, things started to, like, sort of develop. So then they started to grow. And then
Mhm.
I've had to, like, you know, grow them and change them. I mean, they're like somebody said, oh, these curious epilogues. And it's like, well, they're not curious. I put the epilogues in there to
Mhm.
know, like, to kind of like follow the timeline of how they've been written. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, which I enjoyed. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
oh, and people watching, if you have questions for Pamela, put them in the chat and I'll convey them. Otherwise, we'll just, keep vibing as we are wont to do. I wanted to ask you about the relationship between performance and the writing process, because I hear your voice, which I feel like is such a privilege. When I read your work, it's that clear to me, and I, when I'm writing, particularly poetry, I would say when I'm like halfway to what I think might be the finish line with a poem, I start reading it out loud as I'm continuing to write and edit. So I wanted to ask you about the relationship to live performance. Like, have you read most of the book out loud, or did you take a different tack?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that I mean that was like a hard point for me with like Peru's like what is it with her
Review.
review, because
Mm-hmm.
like I don't, I mean, some of the pieces are, you know, of the oral tradition, but a lot of it's not, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, I mean, it's interesting, like, you know, going back to Toni Morrison, or I mean, she's like interdisciplinary, you know, so
Mm-hmm.
there's poetry, you know, there's theater, there are all these things that are going, you know, and like I find that, you know, people are always, because I perform, you know, and certainly, you know, like I have dialogue, I have things going in my head, you know, I do read things out loud to be able to hear them, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like, you know, people are like, I'm writing a book, and they're like, oh, it's a performance. And I said, no, I'm writing a book. And they're like, oh, it's a
Mm.
performance, you know, and it's
I was
kind of
like,
like, you know, it's a
yeah.
play, you know, and it's like, I know the difference between a play, you know what
Right.
I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's
You're like,
a
I
story.
promise I would tell you if I was writing a play.
Right, right. But it's like they can't. I mean, I think it's like, I think it's a little like race, you know. It may, you know, it's like, oh,
Oh,
you're
race,
always,
absolutely.
you know, yeah, you have to be like speaking. I remember like a famous poet who was a teacher, and she's like, oh, I love the jazzy way you say that, you know, and like what, you know, you know what I'm saying? So it's almost like, years ago, somebody was saying, they always put like Black people on the covers of their books. And like, less so like with a white author, it isn't necessarily that way, but there is a way that we're always expected to be performative. You know what I mean? And even if we step outside, I mean, even like, people like told Toni Morrison to the end, that she wasn't a writer. You know what I'm saying? So in a way, and then it was really funny because somebody wrote me and they said, I really enjoy your prose. I really enjoy the way you write prose, and I think you're really gifted, and that you should, work on more stories. And I was like, okay, thank God that somebody can like see the skill in what it is that I do. You know what I mean? And don't just think it's like, a rant.
I mean, there's something that it's the double-bladed nature of Black artists being very good at what they do, where it's almost like the better the artist is, the easier it looks, the more it seems to be taken for granted, which connects to, racism in general, right? And I think, I feel like, and I, as someone who knows writers like closely, like Denez Smith or Morgan Parker, for example, all of them, if I think you actually, you, Morgan Parker, Denez Smith, all write incredibly different, are all technically, masters, and have almost in a way developed, not just developed your own voice, I would say developed entire genres for yourselves that only you three can accurately inhabit. And even still, for all three of you, I've noticed that kind of like, oh, they just like throw it out there. It just like flows. They're like griots, and you're like,
you can read the phone book. And it's like, but it's not the phone book. You know what I mean?
Not the phone book. It's not the phone book. That's not what we're doing. Well, so I did, I am curious, were there aspects of encapsulating your story, because you are someone, you've lived, honey, you've lived, you've traveled and seen so much of the world. And so I wondered if bringing together the totality of your life, childhood, your teens, your 20s, your life now, the pandemic, HIV, AIDS, and putting it all in one book, were there aspects of that phenomenon that were maybe a little bit more intimidating than writing, past projects, publishing past projects?
No, I mean, I'm really glad that you talked about like building your own genre, because that's like really what I feel like I'm doing. In the sense that I think after 9/11, I really feel like I transformed a lot in terms of like my voice. Like I started bringing in things that you wouldn't necessarily, like I did this whole thing in America Ain't Ready on Xena, and like, so I started putting like pop culture, and I had this whole thing about like Xena, what is it? The first time I saw it, Xena was underwater, right? Oh, no. Was she underwater? Yeah. Okay, so the Asian woman was underwater, right? And Xena was leaned over the pool, like, kissing her. And I was, oh, honey,
a moment.
It was like fierce, right? And I mean, it went on for a long time. And then I was like, oh, I get it. That's how they evaded the censors, and that they masked it, under one woman giving another woman oxygen. And I said, but that's one of the things that like nobody understands, that queerness isn't an aberration or any of these things. It's one person giving another person oxygen, air we need to survive.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So once I started writing about, like, I don't know, for some reason I was so like jolted by 9/11, and there was a lot going on in my life too at that time. It was a real kind of critical point that that I started like adding in like the way that I really think, or the way that I really talk, or not having like so many rules, and so I think like, this idea of like like I'm thinking about something now. I really didn't like Get Out. Like I
Okay.
just thought it was like kind of sketch comedy and I felt like they could have gone deeper. If they had gone deeper, it would have been brilliant, right? But then I saw it again, and I was
Mhm.
like, oh shit, that's bigger. That's
Mhm.
bigger.
Mhm.
Right, from the Richard Wright novel. You know what I'm saying? I
Oh,
was like,
Screaming.
oh,
Okay.
yeah. And then I was like, oh. And so now I got to go back and read Richard Wright, and then I got to go through and watch the Get Out series, watch Get Out again, and I want to write a piece about it. You know what I'm saying?
I would read that. I'd read the hell out of that.
You know
I
what
love
I mean?
that.
So it's just kind of like I bring my whole self now. I don't censor like what's the stuff of literature and what's
Right.
not. Like I make everything part of it. So what I watch, the relationships that I have, the things that I talk about with my students, everything is part of it. Because I think early on as an artist, like we have all these rules, right? Oh, this is what a poem sounds like. This is what a short story. If you want to be taken seriously as a writer, this is what you have to do. You know what I mean? But like now I just, put everything in. You know what I mean? So, and I think that that's more the way that we think anyway. You know what I mean? We don't think in a very linear way. All these influences are always there. We've got dialogues going on. We've got, we have the dog running around. We've got like, we've got a siren outside. You know what I mean? So everything's happening simultaneously. So I think creating and telling stories that way, they're tapestries. I mean, that's what I feel like I'm building, and I love weaving in and weaving out and weaving in and weaving out, it's kind of, it's exciting to me,
I love that. It is to me too. We have a question here from Stacy. Can you, oh yeah, right, because you are a visual artist as well. You do work in all of these different forms. And so Stacy asked if you would talk about the cover art, which I'm assuming is one of your paintings and the pieces you've been sharing on Instagram.
Oh, well, I don't know, like definitely during the pandemic, since I was home. I mean, I've been I guess my visual practice has been going on now for about 4 or 5 years. And I came through through art therapy. I had like a fancy insurance and I wanted a new kind of therapy, and I thought, hey, I'll try art therapy. And then I realized that I really loved it, and I really took it seriously, and I feel like I'm living and breathing when I'm making art. I feel like a great freedom when I'm painting and stuff. And so in that regard, so then, I mean, I just have to do it. And so like, I mean, it is like writing to me, it's like, that's how I breathe, So, so during the pandemic, I mean, I've been home a lot. So, like one of the things, and everybody was offering, art classes and this, that. So I've been studying very intently, I've had more time to focus on the art and stuff. And so that's been, so it's transformed from hobby into, a way of being.
Practice.
Yeah.
And I realized too that at one point I was reading the book, I think the orange hat, I kind of feel like you might be wearing the big orange hat
maybe
on the cover. We just can't, you know what I mean? Like it's so big, it's bigger than the
but I drew that, like I told you before the chat started, like what was it, that was with my painting teacher. I made that in a class that, and now I'm getting ready to do a wood carving of that figure. I want to do a couple of wood carvings, but so my teacher I have a crush on. We had to do self-portraits. Yeah. We're not going to go there.
We're not going to go there, but we, we do have crushes on art teachers now and then. I guess for, one last question, something you and I end up talking a lot about in our work, in our conversations, is about institutions. and and who's left out, who's let in, the ways in which institutions support, the way the institutions abandon or constrain. And whether we're talking about this pandemic or certainly HIV/AIDS, right, those are also conversations about institutions and art. And something I've always appreciate it from you, and I hope to continue to learn from you, is your willingness to speak out about institutions, if and tell the truth, and tell the truth as you see it. Is there, what do I want to say? As an artist who has had all of these experiences, and you've lived, I feel, so many lives, you're not new to this game, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Is there like a fundamental idea that you want more readers and writers and editors, to understand about institutions, something we need to own up to?
Well, no, that's a big thing. I'm getting ready to, I think, write a piece about paper bags, like the paper bag test, and remember, like, back in the day, if you were darker than a paper bag,
yeah.
Right, you know what I mean, and how your skin is measured. And I kind of like, I feel like that happens, like we've internalized it, so that like a lot of like my experiences or whatever, I analyze in terms of race, right? So I'm like, oh, I see the way they treat that white person or that white guy, you know what I mean? And like, and they're treating me totally different, you know what I mean? Or, how much authority I have or I'm allowed to have. Right now, I'm having like an issue about, I guess, recognition, in the sense that, I mean, part of like the whole thing about, Funeral Diva was also that women of color, were not allowed to speak about AIDS. You know what I mean? Or not allowed to speak. I mean, it was just kind of like, okay, this happened to, predominantly white men. So this was a story that was being told, and that, and like sort of like the people of color that they talked about were tokens, but never really like, we never get to helm the stories, the big narrative, right? And so, part of like Funeral Diva was like changing that narrative, being a woman, being a lesbian, being a woman of color, and then talking about like this epidemic, so it's completely changing the narrative, right? And that was really important to me. And I guess I just want to say like letting more people in, you know what I mean? Like I just feel like, I mean, I have like an issue with like the Star Machine, in the sense that I just feel like there's so many experiences. Like, like somebody was asking about like film rights or whatever. It hasn't gone anywhere. But, and it was interesting. I was like, wow, Funeral Diva, that particular piece would make a really interesting film. I've never seen anything like it. You know what I mean? Like, a Black girl coming of age in like New York City, Black queer girl, being impacted by the AIDS epidemic. Like, how would that change the world if we could see a story like that? And then actually like Rada Blank, and I can't say enough about the 40-year-old version. Like she just made this film on like Netflix, and I'm telling you, it's not perfect, but she does some things that I have never ever seen in film. Just like in terms of a story, like and it's not all one of the things that stood out to me was that it's not all about like marrying wealth, getting out of the ghetto. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, actually what happens is that like everybody tells the truth in the hood. Like the hood is like where reality happens. And that the more that she goes into the white world, the less reality and the less truth is told, right? And so I thought that was really interesting because we never see that. All the movies say, you marry the prince, right? You know what I mean? And you go live in the castle. And that's the, assimilation is the key. So just, this woman having this story where it's kind of like, there's a Black man. It doesn't look like, I don't know, doesn't look like Marlon Brando. He has dreads. He's dark skinned. he's a beautiful lead. You know, you never seen him before, and it's like he's good, you know, and he's from the hood. He's not, you know, and so just like things like that, and there's a lesbian narrative, and it's like it's beautiful, it's humane, you know, and I'm like, more of this, please.
More of this, please. I absolutely agree. Well, Pamela, more of Funeral Diva, please. Thank you so much for this conversation and for this book. It's such an important contribution. I've already recommended it to like several students. So yeah,
thank you. Thank you, Saeed. I love you and I adore you. I want to hear your work too.
I love it. I love it.
Oh, well, can we hear like one more? Like, because I didn't get to talk to anybody, really.
Are there any more questions? I think we're good. Yeah, I think we're good. Maris, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Pamela, Saeed, thank you for just a wonderful evening. Audience, thank you. Please buy the book, Funeral Diva, the works of Saeed Jones, which you'll be able to find in McNally Jackson. And thanks for coming out. Oh.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Oh,
thanks
bye,
again.
Funeral Diva.
Buy two copies.
Okay. Oh, I'm reading the chat. Don't turn it off yet. Okay. Okay. All right, cool. Bye, Funeral Diva. Christmas presents, Hanukkah presents. Bye, How We Fight for Our Lives, Saeed Jones.
Bye both. I love it.
Okay. Bye. Love you, Pamela. Yay. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks to you both. You're amazing. Thanks. Sure will. Thank you. Can't find it in Australia. Thank you, Goddess. Love you guys. Yes. Wait. Love to you both. What? Can we stay on a minute?
I can hang out.
Okay. All right.